Good morning. My name is Marie Alcock. Some of you have been in sessions with me. I appreciate all the time you've been spending participating in these conversations. For those of you who have not met me yet, just very briefly, I've been an educator for over 25 years. I have worked in public and private education. Fundamentally, I started off a high school math teacher, so that pretty much gives you an idea of my origin story. But when I taught middle school, I taught literacy, so English and history. So it was a humanities development. And then I was pod teaching. So that meant I taught science, social studies, English, and math to 8th grade when I had 2,000 8th graders at a year-round school. I've also taught anger management, Latin fundamentals for literacy development, the sound system, and band. I have had the opportunity to be the director of an infant toddler through grade 8 program. So we worked on the development of curriculum for 6-week-old, T2, T3, and then reception all the way up through year 1, year 2, and so forth. So I realized I had a lot to learn, so I went back to school, got my PhD in brain research. So if you want to talk about brain development, impacts on learning, changes in brain development over the last 4 decades, I'm more than happy to get into that conversation. Then I ended up teaching graduate school, which is not that different from middle school, if you think about it. And we have spent a lot of time working locally as instructional coaches and being a consultant nationally and internationally. And so part of what we're going to talk about today is a focus on self-navigation, which comes from a combination of that brain science that I was just mentioning, maximizing engagement. So specifically engagement, how do you measure engagement? How do you actually teach students how to participate in engagement, right? You can't just say, I expect it, right? That's what I did as a high school math teacher. Shouldn't they have learned that by now, right? They should do it. And I was grading their ability to do it. I was evaluating their ability to have personal responsibility and social responsibility and punctuality, but I wasn't actually teaching them how to do it. And so what we've learned is that's a mistake, right? You can't evaluate and grade what you're not overtly teaching. And so we've put a lot of effort into finding out, how do you actually teach something like self-navigation? And we talk about self-navigation as one of those contemporary skills that a learner needs today, right? They need to be able to self-navigate. They need to be able to organize their own learning. They need to be aware of what they're learning and how they're learning it. We want them to be able to self-assess, right? So we've got all these grand expectations of this contemporary learner. We're saying, oh, there's no such thing as essential content that we can hand to a child that will guarantee a career for them. What do I mean by that? I don't mean that there's no such thing as essential content. There is, right? There are things we need to know to function in a complex society. No doubt. I'm not going to take that argument on. But what I am going to suggest is that it's very difficult for us to say, I can teach your child everything they need to learn by the end of high school so that they're ready, completely ready for their future, their career, even college, right? Because things and expectations, meaning content knowledge, is changing, skill expectations are changing so fast and so rapidly that the accepted challenge now is that we must teach children how to be learners, how to organize themselves and self-regulate, self-motivate, and self-assess. So that means you and I are now going to have a conversation about, how do you actually teach children how to self-regulate, self-motivate, and self-assess as a set of skills? And how do we document that? How do we organize that? How do we put that into something where we can give meaningful feedback and not run out of time for all the other things we have to do, right? So that's the conversation we're about to sign up for. I feel like the airline attendant, right? If this is not the flight you were prepared to get on, right? Feel free to make your other choices, but For the next 3 hours, this is where we're going. And we're going to go into how to teach it. And I'm going to show you samples. And they're just samples of a way to do it. Right? There's more than one way to do this. But I'd like to show you some pretty kind of, this is where you begin. And then where you take it past that certainly is endless and open. All right. So for that piece, that's the why. That's why we have to do this. We know this about kids and where we're going. I also want to suggest that there's no age limit on this, meaning it's a difficult question to ask ourselves and say, at what age should we begin teaching children to self-navigate? Right? What an interesting question to ask ourselves. And research has told us actually there is no age too young, meaning we should really be putting lessons together where we teach the basics of self-navigation as early as 4 years old, 3 years old, 4 years old, and 5 years old, helping children work around the pronouns, wrestle with the fact that they have to make choices about learning, and they have to make commitments to learning. I want to be super clear on this, though. I'm not saying we're expecting sophisticated decision-making around their learning at that point, right? But we're creating moments where the brain is aware that I need to learn this, right? It's even about the pronoun, right? It's not you need to learn it. It's I need to learn it. And I can make choices about how I learn it. That's something we can model and build for year ones. And we're going to role play different versions of that if you'd like, but it's almost comedic, right? The process. We have to be ready as teachers to witness the chaos that is children making their own decisions about learning. And there's an instructional method behind it where we let that happen. And that's the foundational brain science. So we're going to get into the conversation around that if you'd like. I will also suggest, if anyone here is from middle school or high school, if children have not been taught how to be self-navigating, all right, for years before 5th and 6th grade, before middle school and high school, that the process is very similar. It's very challenging, and it's going to be just as chaotic.